Now, if you've been around the watch review world, you know one of the most popular questions people ask you, especially when they know that you go hands-on a lot of watches, are what's a great brand and what watch would you recommend? One of the things I've heard several people discussing lately who are just getting into watch collecting are what brands are better than other brands, and this is something that is constantly spewed along the forums, with people not understanding exactly where the money is actually going. I've heard people argue that Tissot is better than Hamilton, Certina is better than Mito or Longines, and really they all don't understand that the money funnels into one large watch group or umbrella company that owns them all. Now we're going to get into the nitty gritty of who owns what, because a lot of people really don't understand that it's much like the car community, right? You have Chevy, who is also GMC. GMC owns Chevy, and that's why you have things like the Yukon that looks exactly like the Suburban, and their parts are interchangeable. I'm not saying it's like this for all watch brands. However, it's clear that that is the case. So let's hop in to this list. Now, be forewarned, not every watch company is on this list. Some aren't really worth talking about, or they are worth talking about, but really it just doesn't do anybody any good. I'm going to mention companies like Robert Dubuis, which is a very well-known watch company in the watch world, but not everybody knows of Roger Dubuis. So what I'm going to do is keep the most well-known watch brands that have the most name recognition that everybody knows about. Now, this is going to be about 90% of all the watch companies out there, so I think you're still going to find some value. Now, before we hop into all the listing, and we're going to start off with the Swatch group because they're the number one. Before we hop into that, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Guys, at 15,000 subscribers, I will be doing a giveaway of a Tissot PRX automatic that is in the mail right now. I will do a review on that, and I will give it away to one of my subscribers. Now, to be part of the giveaway, you have to participate in things like liking videos, commenting on videos, actually participating in the community that we're growing here to be able to win it and be a subscriber. Also, check out the links down below, guys. Jomashop, the link for Jomashop helps the channel. It sends you right over to Jomashop. They are the best gray market watch dealer, in my opinion, online. They offer great discounts. I've ordered a lot of watches from them in the past, and you shopping through that link really does help the channel. Also, chasestraps.com, my own personal watch strap company, the best watch straps on the market at the most affordable prices. Check them out. So I said I'm going to start off with the Swatch group because it is the largest of the umbrella companies or groups in all of this list. They're worth billions of dollars in the market share. Yeah, that's billions with a B. And they're not just the cheap plastic watch company that everybody knows Swatch to be. The System 51 is their most popular watch, and it is a plastic watch worth about $100. However, the Swatch group, who owns Swatch, is worth billions, and they own almost everything. Well, not almost everything, but pretty close to everything. So let's get into the companies they own. Now, would it surprise you that Swatch owns companies like Tissot, Mito, Longines, Breguet, Certina, and companies like Blancpain, right? All very well-known watch companies, and we're not even getting into the most well-known in the Swatch group. They own other brands like Hamilton, Oris, Glasuta Original, which is a very high-end watch brand, Harry Winston, and yes, even Omega. Now, a lot of people don't know that Omega is owned by Swatch, but Omega is not an independent watch company like a company like Rolex, and we'll get into that at the very end of the video. However, Omega is owned by Swatch. Now, a lot of these companies will tell you that their groups, their watch groups, their main group that owns them, don't have any authority over what they produce in their own separate companies. Really, Swatch Group doesn't really care what Breguet is producing or Blancpain is producing as long as they're making money. Seems to be different in the recent years, and I will mention the Omega Moon Swatch, the Omega Swatch collaboration, where they took a Speedmaster shape and a Speedmaster kind of watch, made it out of a plastic swatch, and stamped the Omega symbol on it. Now, a lot of people know this and they were a little upset. Yes, did it cause a stir and ruckus in the watch community? Yes. Did Omega want to do it? Who really knows? Does Omega want to lower their brand recognition from a $3,000 watch at its base level to a $250 plastic toy? Well, I would say probably not, but they really don't have a choice, do they? Because if Swatch says jump, then Omega puts their brand on it. I'm not going to get into a rant, but it's just one of those things to consider. Now, next in the watch group or umbrella is Richemont. Now, Richemont, again, is like Swatch, not nearly as big, but they also own a lot of very well-known watch brands that you yourself have probably lusted after. Now, the main one on that list for me is Cartier, only because I've purchased a Cartier for my fiance, the Tank Solo. I myself am looking at the Cartier Tank Solo or Tank Santos, so Cartier is one of those watches that I lust after. Now, Cartier brand is under Richemont, along with several others. These include brands like Piaget, IWC, Baumer and Mercier, even Ilanga Asuna. You have Robert Dubuis, Panerai, which I understand why Panerai is not an independent company. They've made a lot of mistakes in the past, and I understand why another company owns Panerai. But then you have other brands under there like Montblanc, JLC, and even one of the Trinities, Vacheron Constantin. This really surprised me because if you look at the trinity of watches, the Holy Trinity, Vacheron Constantin is the only watch brand out of the trinity that is under another watch group. The other two are independently owned and operated. So this is kind of interesting when moving forward in purchasing your watches. Now, the next watch group surprised me even more than something like the Swatch group. I understand that Swatch, I've known Swatch has owned a lot in the past, but the next company is known for their fashion brands, and that is the Fossil watch group. Now, I didn't know that Fossil actually owned some Swiss watch companies, but Fossil we all know as the cheap watch that is entry level to most people who are just starting out in watch collecting. Fossil is a fashion watch, much like Movement or Vincero. Fossil has been around for a lot longer, and clearly they're bigger than even I thought. Now, a lot of their watches that they own, because this is primarily a watch channel, are more fashion watches, so it falls along with their fashion trend. They own things like Skagen, which is actually a decent watch brand, but they also own watch brands like Diesel, Kate Spade, Michael Kors. Kate Spade and Michael Kors aren't really watch brands. They do have watches, but they're more fashion brands aimed at high-end purses and luxury goods. And that includes things like Tory Burch as well. They also own Tory Burch. I never knew what Tory Burch was until I went down to Las Vegas in this last trip, and I watched my fiance spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars on a tiny purse from Tory Burch that was, again, expensive, but they're clearly owned, which I didn't know, by the Fossil Watch Group, by the Fossil Group. You also have things like DKNY, you have things like Armani and Armani Exchange, also under the same brand of the Fossil Group, and you even have the famous Swiss brand Zodiac under the Fossil Group, which really surprised me because Zodiac is one of those watches that I feel is heavily underrated, and they've been around for a very, very long time. Their Seawolf is a great dive watch that nobody ever seems to look at anymore, and maybe that's why Fossil owns Zodiac, because they've kind of fallen off the wayside, but it would be great to see them get right back on track because they do make some pretty great watches. Now, there are some watch brands that are probably kicking around in your mind at this point that I haven't said that, yes, are still owned by a watch group. Again, we're not talking about Rolex because everybody knows Rolex is independently owned. Tudor is owned by Rolex, but those two are Rolex. But there are a few other high-end watch brands we just haven't talked about yet, and they are owned by LVMH Group. Now, these are companies like Tag Heuer, companies like Zenith, companies like Hublot, and even Bulgari, right? You have very heavy hitters in the luxury watch world owned by this group. Now, this group is not very large. Now, when I say large, I don't necessarily mean monetarily wise. I mean brand recognition with all the brands underneath them. So if I say the brand group or the group is small, maybe it's not small monetarily. They may be worth $2 billion and only own 6 brands, but it's small in relativity to a watch group that owns 20 brands, if you understand what I'm saying. So if I say small, I can hear it already, people commenting down below, making these comments that, well, Richmond is actually larger than whatever, or so-and-so is larger than whatever, because I'm talking about size of companies owned, not necessarily monetarily, even though I mentioned that Swatch Group was worth billions, because I didn't even know how much money is in the watch world, the watch buying world, until I really dove deep into it. So don't hit me hard in the comments for the things that I'm saying. Now, moving forward, we're going to move further to the east with companies like Citizen. Now, Citizen is a very, very well-known watch brand. I would say Citizen is just as well-known as Rolex and Omega when it comes to their watches. Now, every Joe, Schmo, Tom, Dick, and Harry knows Rolex and Omega. And I would say 98% of all of those Tom, Dick, and Harrys also known Citizen, because it is a great entry-level watch, especially with their Ego Drive, that a lot of people buy as their first nice watch. Most people don't buy Rolexes or Omega. They buy Citizens. And Citizen also owns other companies like Bulova, which is one of those companies, again, people get into. Now, they also own other things like Arnold & Son, which is a very high-end watch, Alfina, and even things like Frederique Constant, which is a great entry-level Swiss watch. The funny thing that I have found is some of these non-Swiss watch groups like Citizen, which is a Japanese company, own Swiss watch brands. I find it extremely fascinating. Then you have some smaller watch groups like Kering that own companies like Gucci, Girard-Perregaux, Ulysse Nardin, and then you have other companies like Invicta that owns glycine. I had no idea that Invicta owned glycine. The Glycine Combat Sub has been one of the watches I recommend to everybody as their first entry-level Swiss watch brand, and it's owned by Invicta, one of the most hated watch brands in history. People hate Invicta. People hate Invicta like Nico Leonard hates Hublot. And it amazes me because, well, the Glycine is a great watch and it's owned by Invicta, which makes low quality, great entry-level watches, because I'd argue that the Invicta Pro Diver is a great entry-level homage Submariner. For $80, you're getting a NH35 automatic, 200 meters of water resistance. For under $100, it's hard to beat that. But then they own things like Glycine, and it gives me a little bit more respect for companies like Invicta. And then you have companies like Seiko that, of course, own their own brand. Seiko, Grand Seiko, Pulsar, and Orient. Then you have the independents. The independents like Rolex that I explained earlier. Audemars Piguet, Chopard, Patek Philippe. And it's hard not to respect the independent watch companies more because I feel like they do it on their own. Does Audemars Piguet need a watch group that owns them? No, they're part of the Trinity. Does Rolex need anybody to own them? No, they are the most well-known watch brand in the world. Do they need anybody? No, not at all. So the independent watch, Chopard. A lot of people don't know about Chopard, and the pure fact they're not owned by a larger company really gives me more respect for Chopard because they're doing it on their own, and they make great watches. When I was going through these companies, it really did surprise me who owned what was owned by what. I'll even go back to Glycine, who's owned by Invicta. I didn't know that Orient and Pulsar was owned by Seiko. I didn't know a lot of I didn't know that Vacheron Constantin was owned by Richemont. I didn't know that one of the Trinities was owned by another watch group. They're not even independently owned, right? And whether or not you can argue that these companies have independent artistic creativity, I'll go back to the Omega Moon Swatch, which I don't think Omega really wanted to be a part of, but really didn't have a choice because they're owned by a larger company. Now, all that being said, I would love to hear what you guys have to say about what I've said about this list. Did you guys know that some of these companies were owned by other companies? The Fossil group really did surprise me because I didn't know that Fossil owned as much as they did or was as large as they were. I see Fossil as a cheap fashion watch like Invicta, right? Is a cheap watch, but yet they own glycine. So it really did surprise me. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say down below. Now, I have a lot of videos coming up here in the next few days, so make sure you guys hit that subscribe button, leave a comment of the content. Please be a part of the exchange here. You'll be entered into winning the 15,000 subscriber giveaway, the Tissot PRX. That review is coming in about a month. Hopefully, if we can get to 15,000 subscribers, that'll be given away real soon. We'll see. Hit that notification bell because people are saying they're having an issue with being notified that I'm dropping videos normally unless something happens. Like I'm extremely busy at work. Normally I release a video every 3 to 4 days. I try to do 3 a week, so there's a lot of videos coming up in the future. Hit that notification bell and I will see you in the next one.